So welcome back. We're looking forward, Bezos Hashem, to do this final piece in Yud Tes of Igeres HaKodesh. You get page Kuf Chof Tes in the original Hebrew text on the top. Ha'osis Hanigus Lanu. The opposite side of that would be 256. If you recall, we did mention in, I believe, the last class or the one before that this Igeres, this epistle of the Alter Rebbe, is divided into two, even though this Ha'osis Hanigus Lanu is really another example, the way the Alter Rebbe notes this idea, which we're going to explain in a moment, the way it is in Keichas HaNefesh, Machshava, Dibur, Ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action of the human being, the human condition, that we could apply it to one point, which the Alter Rebbe made over here in the beginning of your test. There was one idea, which was the final idea of this, in other words, the previous part, which would be the previous class, the very last class, towards the end of the one before. If you recall, the Alter Rebbe introduced this idea of the chitzonius of an idea as opposed to the pnimius. We gave an example. There's the pnimius of the cup, that it's just there to receive the content, if it's liquid or anything else, and this is the very natural state of the cup. It's a mekabel, it receives, but yet there's another objective of the cup, even though if you would call this would be the chitzonius, because you're taking the cup and you're pouring it outwards. Of course, you would say that's the real benefit of the cup, that you could drink from it or extend it to another party. So understandably, that is a great gain, and that is a great objective and comfort which we receive from the cup, because it could extend itself to someone else or to yourself. You're drinking from the cup. But if you look at in context of pnimius and chitzonius, it's easy to understand. The pnimius is that it receives. The chitzonius is that you're taking from the cup and you're extending it outwards. Chitzonius, outwardness, if you will. So you're drinking from the cup, so you're taking the content of the cup and you're pouring it out of the cup, bringing from the pnimius of it to the chitzonius of it. And so too, if you're extending it to another party. So too, we spoke about Torah. There's the pnimius of Torah, meaning to say where the Torah is sourced, where the Torah comes from, which is Torah is Chochmos Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Namely, when we talk about Chochmos Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chochmah Datzilos, again, we explained all this in the previous class, how it's miyuchod b'ma'atzila, it's one with its emanator, it's truly one. That's the pnimius of Chochmah. That's where it's calm, surreal, a serene place where it is just has that intimate unity with its emanator, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is what Chochmah of Atzilus is all about. Again, we explained this in detail, and then when in the previous class, basically the last two classes, but we underscore this idea even more in the very latter class, this is its natural state, that it's one, it's miyached, misyached, b'pnimiyuto, with the ma'atzilo, which literally translates emanator, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the very natural, comfortable, most pristine state of Chochmah Datzilus, that it's miyuchod b'ma'atzila. That is the pnimius of it. But then the Chochmah Datzilus turns around and says, I'm going to take this energy and pass it onward. That's the chitzonius of the Chochmah. Pass it on to the world of Atzilus. For that matter, the whole Olam Atzilus that we spoke so many times is imbued with that very spirit of Chochmah Datzilus, because it makes an impact on the entire Olam Atzilus. But then it doesn't stop there, and it makes its way down through the entire Seder Ishtalshalus, which would be the order of evolution, all the way down from Bria to Yitzira to Asiya. Now, where do we see this Chochmah making its way down, or making its statement down here within Seder Ishtalshalus and ultimately in Elam Asiyah? That's the Torah that we have, because what is Torah? As we mentioned, Torah is Chochmah Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The fact that we have the Torah down here in Elam Hazeh, that a person could open a Gemara and learn Chochmah Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, become one with the Chochmah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For that matter, the ultimate union any created being could be with its creator, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is through Torah way greater and deeper than any other way a created entity, created being could unite with its creator. Of course, generically we know that we speak about a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That would be a mitzvah. Actually, mitzvah is in Lashon tzaf, so it's about a combination. It's about a connection with the mitzvah mitzvahs, the one who commanded these mitzvahs. You put on tefillin, you're one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But yet, you do any mitzvah, you shake a lulav and eat matzah and so on. But there's nothing like the union which unfolds, which is experienced when a person learns Torah. Alter Rebbe has it famously in the 5th chapter of Tanya, the 23rd, 37th. And Alter Rebbe uses there's no comparison of the union which comes through Limud Torah in comparison to any other type of union, including Kima mitzvahs. Now, why do we stop learning Torah in order to do a mitzvah? It's explained in Lamed Zayin itself, because we never lose focus of the ultimate objective and goal. Why Hashem created this world, to establish an abode in this very physical world, and therefore we do have to focus on our mitzvahs, even it means that we have to stop learning Torah periodically to do the mitzvah, to put on tefillin and to eat matzah and so on. Namely, a mitzvah namely a mitzvah which cannot be done, it cannot be executed through others, only through oneself. So he stops learning Torah, even though the union through Torah is be'inarech. There's no comparison. In Kates, Lashon and Pedikei, and later on, there's no comparison. That is the union which a Yid connects himself with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Limud Torah. Where does this all transpire? It doesn't transpire in Atzilus, it transpires in Elam Hazah. This very physical. How did the Torah come all the way to Elam Hazah? Torah is Chachmas Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Torah is Chachma Atzilus. It's one with its creator, and its again most natural state is that union and the unity, a constant oneness with its emanator. So how did it come down till you say the Shtalshalus? In general, and particularly to Elam Hazah, the person could take a Gemara or a Shulchan Aruch or a Tanya, anything, and learn Torah, and can have that unmatched union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The answer, yeah, the Torah turned about face from its very natural state to be miyuchad b'ma'atzila and made its way down into Seder Shtalshalus, which is again similar to that very cup, which the natural state of the cup is that it's mikabel and it sits in a state with the content in the cup. And then you take the cup and kind of the about face. Now you're taking the content from the cup and you're passing it outward. That is the chokhmah. That is the way it expresses itself. B'chitzeini yusei. That it makes its way down, the opposite of its very natural, comfortable, and most appreciated and delightful state, which is, of course, the state when it's miyuchad b'matzila, that oneness with its emanator, and it makes its way down. That is just the opposite of the natural state of Chachma Atzilus. That's the point of Torah, and that is what the novelty of Torah is all about. That's why Torah is called a gift. This is the point of a gift, that someone has something very precious, and they impart with that precious object, that precious item. If it's a watch, it's a ring, and they extend it to another party, so they're imparting with something which is inherently dear, and usually when it comes to matana, something dear one wants to hold with themselves, but the point of a present, a gift, is they impart with it, and they extend it to another party. That's what Torah, as Lashon here, Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, if you recall in last week's class, that this was Moshe Rabbeinu Zocha Shetinosin Al Torah Al Yodei. Torah is called Noivles Chochma Shalamayla. Noivles means which drips. It's something which is the outer dimension of Chochma, which this was what Moshe Rabbeinu was all about, because Moshe Rabbeinu, as the Lashon V'ra Isa Es HaCheirai, so we had that first part of this Igeres, Yutes again, where he speaks about Moshe Rabbeinu's Re'iyah. Where did he have that vision, right? That vision in Elokus, only the Achirayim, Uponai Loyiros, that was the first part. Which part, where did Moshe Rabbeinu have that Yiro? He says in Netzach, Yisei Machas, we explained it then, because that is on the onset, the Chitzeni and something. I mean, this again, not to go into it, you can see it in the previous classes. But then by extension, he says, well, that's why Moshe Zocha Shetinosim Torah Al Yoda Upon V'Ro Isa Sacheirai. The whole Moshe Rabbeinu vision and identification was with the Achirayim of Chochmah Atzilus, the way it's expressed In Etzachirai means in Etzachitzenius, to bring the Torah going away from its original pristine state and coming down into Seder Ishtalshus. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu accomplished. This is why the Rishta chose Moshe Rabbeinu. Shetinasing Torah al Yodei. Because this is all synonymous with the Vera Isa Sachel, the vision and Achiraim of Torah, Achiraim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Achiraim of the about face of Chochmah Datzilus. This is what Torah is all about. So when the Torah says Vera Isa Sachirai, it's not only telling Moshe Rabbeinu, no, Panela, you cannot see my pneumias, but Vera Isa Sachirai, which again, even on the first explanation of the Alter Rebbe in this chapter, there's only a positive approach to what Moshe was able to see. Particularly, the Alter Rebbe differentiates between vision, of course, as we explained it and elaborated on this idea, the conviction of vision as opposed to the conviction of any other hands-on or perception of any other matter we mentioned. Then Eined Nasadain, a witness can never become a judge, because once you see something, it's impossible to understand and to identify and appreciate this matter in the opposite, a different way, because you saw it. Seeing something is the greatest connection with this which you see, with the greatest level of conviction is this which you see, much more than what you hear. Even somebody which is an Eid Neman, a trustworthy witness, but there's always the other side, and therefore this is what a Dayan is all about. There are two sides, two Eidim Nemanim, and he has to discern what he believes based on the Koyach of Torah, the Siyata, the Shmaya, the help from above. He's a real Talmid Chacham, he's a real Dayan to come up with the right verdict, the verdict which Hashem had in mind. In this very case, in the verdicts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way it comes through Torah's Emes, that's what the Dayan is all about. But if he saw something, it's impossible for him to be the objective judge. So when Moshe Rabbeinu said Vera Isa Sachei, the Rebbe underscores, yes, it's a Chayrai, but there's Vera Isa. Moshe Rabbeinu sees clearly. In other words, it's not a physical, it's not vision like you see a table, but there's a sensory vision, but vision no less, as opposed to the Hasaga. That's what Alter Rebbe compares it to the Chachmei HaEmes, which saw deeper, they understood and perceived deeper. That it wasn't the Vera Isa of Moshe Rabbeinu. But then by extension, Alter Rebbe says that is synonymous with the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu Zocha Shetinas Torah al Yodei, that Torah was given through Moshe. That's the message of Vera Isa Sachaya, because that's what Torah is. Torah is Chachmas Yishal Kosh Baruch, the way it turns about face and makes its way down through Moshe Rabbeinu. Again, the Rebbe's choice of Moshe Rabbeinu, that he should be the one to bring Torah downward. That's what Torah is called, Noivlois, which drips, or in other words, goes away from the Chochmah, the way it's in its pristine state, and makes its way down here. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu is all about, and that is embedded in that very message, in that very pasuk, Vera Isa Sacheirai. Your objective, your goal of Moshe Rabbeinu is to take that Chochmah Datzilus and Ocheirai and express it in its chitzenic form, to bring it down into Seder Ishtalshus, all the way down here, Lamato, to a Yid, which is a Neshama Milbesh, is Beguf, invested in the body, could take any matter of Torah and connect with that unprecedented union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through that idea of Torah. If it's a Blat Gemara, a Mishnah, Halach and Shulchan Aruch, and so on and so forth. So today, this was again a summary of the previous class. So today, the Alter Rebbe shows you this idea. Again, really, if you learn the Ha'isi Sanigos, learn these words, this second part, you can understand why the Alter Rebbe divided, because he's just showing you this idea. In other words, if you learn this Ha'isi Sanigos, this part which we're learning today, you don't really see the connection on the onset to the beginning of the chapter, the beginning of the Igeris. It's only in the end, really, the more familiar terminologies, which we had in the previous classes, is the very last few words. V'zeu, these are words which are again familiar to us, based on the first part over here. Then v'zeu achirayim v'chitzeini esnihi me'partz v'elin shenichnes b'tachten v'islepchines b'echi b'chayis kinega. But up to till you come there to there, you don't really see the connection. But again, working your way back, and you understand what the Alter Rebbe is trying to do over here is just pointing out the way it is in the human condition, by a human being, how something which is deep has it's all about a pneumistic idea, but yet it could turn about face, and express itself and be manifest on a much lower level, maintaining its inner spirit. This is the whole idea of this presentation again of this Isis Nikos Lanu, the way it is by the human being. And once we'll conclude this Isis Nikos, we'll of course, again, even more than what we're doing at this time, we'll be able to see the direct connection of namely the whole Perek Yutes, the whole Igeres Yutes up till now. So, just to quickly summarize again this, or point out again, Igeres HaKodesh, the fourth segment of Sefer Tanya. Distinctly mentioned, we had a whole presentation at the beginning of Yud, which is 9 back. You can see all this, previous classes, wherever you're watching previous classes, namely, you'd appreciate it more on the original website, that's tanyaonline.com, tanyaonline.com. The advantage of this site is that all the previous classes are lined up on the left side of the screen from the very beginning, for that matter, very beginning of Tanya Kadisha. Tanya Kadisha is comprised of 5 halakim, again with precision, we say this time and again. Famous Varta that Tzemach Tzedek, that Tanya is known to be the Teres Shebiksav of Teres Achsidus, thus 5 halakim in Sefer Tanya. There's Likutei Amorim, Sheikh Bemunish, Igeres HaTshuva, and then Igeres HaKodesh and Kuntres HaKodesh. We merited to conclude the entire Likutei Amorim, which is the grander part of the Sefer. And then Sheikh Bemunah, the second, Igeres HaTshuva, and Igeres HaKodesh, which we were presently learning, we merited to we're concluding is the last part of the 19th epistle. We did mention this is a little from the very beginning. 1920 is going to be a real interesting ride, I must say, because 20 is really, really complicated. 20 is much more complicated type of Igeres, but these are really the only two. 19 and 20. 20 is by far much more complex. Complicated is complex, and we'll have to take it really step by step. It'll be a big celebration when we finish it. It's very extraordinarily long, lengthy comparison to all the other Igeres Kodesh. But this also, if you noticed over here in Igeres HaKodesh, I believe this is the 8th class. There's a lot that needed to be explained as you took notes. So the advantage of this very website that all the previous classes from the very beginning is really lined up, and of course, from top to bottom, it's easy to see, to identify the classes of this very Igeres HaKodesh. We did mention as well, we do mention periodically as the advantage of the way this class is set up, that you have this easy access to all the previous classes, because Alter Rebbe himself cross-references from one chapter to the other, from one Igeres to the other. We do the same, of course, if something is explained, elaborated on in a chapter or from the very beginning of Sefer Tanya. So why take the time? We just point out where it's explained. It's really a click away, a few seconds. With today's technology, a few seconds, and you can go to that place. Again, it's easy to find the area where this idea was explained by the Alter Rebbe, and we took the time then to explain it. So this is an advantage. Of course, there's one more advantage, the way the text is set up in a separate scroll bar, thus easy to follow, as we, again, now and then mention. So we begin, and again, in Kuf Chavtes on the top, Ha'isi is Haniglis Lanu. So let's try to focus on this keta, on this part, without going back and forth to see the connection of the message of Yutes. We just learn it in face value, the way it is, to understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying, over here explaining this idea, the way it is by the human being, in his machshava dibur ma'aseh, in his thought, speech, and action, which is again nothing to do with the Yiddishkeit. Every human being has machshava dibur ma'aseh, namely the human being. You could say by many other of Hashem's creations, but nonetheless by the human being that is structured. Ma'aseh, dibur, speech, which of course speech is uniquely to the gift given to the human being. That's what makes the human being. Ma'aser ha'adam is namely min ha'behema, is namely his speech, and then machshava is thought. So the Alter Rebbe is going to present this idea the way it is by the human being, and then eventually conclude, as we just said, to demonstrate the connection of this presentation to the main message of Yutes. But instead of going back and forth, let's learn this for face value to understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here in this Isis Nigas Lanu, and towards the end we'll come back and again we'll tie it in. Additionally, the way we mentioned this briefly over here, we'll try to Be'ez Hashem tie it in, and that would be the conclusion of Yutes Be'ez Hashem. So let's see. Ha'Isis Nigas Lanu, letters which are revealed to us. Hein b'ma'aseh, dibur, machshava, may it be in action, speech, and thought. What does it mean? letters which are revealed to us in Maisa. And what does it mean, letters that are revealed to us in Dibur, in speech? What does it mean in Machshava? What is the revelation of letters in Machshava? So the Alter Rebbe says, it goes on, he just says it's something which you can easily appreciate. When you look at letters, example, the Alter Rebbe uses the Sefer Torah, classically, the Sefer Torah, which they have the letters of Torah, Ksav Ashuri, namely, when we speak about the Eisius, Hakdeshis of our Sefer Torah, is the Eisius within the Sefer Torah. So this would be Eisius, and we can understand why this is Maisa, because this is something which is tangible. You can see it, you can touch it even. These are the Eisius, touch it, I say. The ink is an example, which is on the parchment. This is an Aleph, that's a Beis, that's a Gimel. So these are the Eisius, the way it is in Maisa, in action. As Dr. Rebbe says, the Maisa, which is Tmunas, is the image of the letters. Shebiksav, Eisius Shebiksav Ashuri, which is the written Eisius, which we know to be called Ksav Ashuri. These are the Eisius which is in every Sefer Torah, Shabbat Sefer Torah. That would be Eisius of Maisa. Okay. Then there's Eisius of Dibur, Eisius of speech. What is Eisius of speech? Nechkok is behevel v'keil ha'mischal v'chal beis chalukim. This is something which we could easily identify. When we speak about any type of speech, rather than any type of language, it's usually divided into 22 expressions. You have the Aleph Beis or Lahabdil ABC or any other language. There's no more than 22 Havaris expressions which exist, again, by the human being in the human condition in the context of speech, in any language, by any nation, because that is the program which is built into every human being. The question is how it's expressed. The question is the combination, in certain combinations and certain maybe accents and expressions, the message comes out. If it's in English or any other language, or Lashon HaKodesh primarily. But it's always Chav Beis. It's the same 22 expressions again, which is associated with the 5 instruments of the known to be the tongue, the gums, the lips, and the throat. So there's the throat. You have the Hey Moitze Sapeh, which Dr. Rebbe is going to mention is over here as well. Whenever he speaks about speech, I believe he does it over here also. The Hey Moitze Sapeh, the 5 instruments are the tongue, the teeth, the gums, the lips, and the throat. All that, the Eibishter gifted the human being. Ayodum lenefesh r'chayo, says the Targum, l'ruach mamalo. It's the gift which only the human being has, which is the gift of speech, and it exists across every language, every nation, every language. It's the same 22 expressions come from the same Hey Moitze Sapeh, these 5 instruments. The only difference is the combination, its expression, its accent. So these Eisius, these letters, are classically the Eisius HaDibur. So when you say Eisius HaNigvus Lanu V'Maisa Dibur, Dibur is the speech, the way we know it. As the Alter Rebbe's Lashon over here, he said Dibur Nechkokis Behevel V'Kei, which are engraved in the breath and in the voice, Hamischalik. That's the way the person talks, that he expresses it. If you notice that whenever you talk, put your hand by your mouth, it's not just the words coming out. There's oxygen or breath, which connects with the coil, and that's the way the Eisius, the letters are formulated, are expressed, are something which you could identify, hear, communicate, and so on. The coil of Mischalik, which is divided the Chavis Allah from Shainim, into 22 divisions in their image, in the way they sound, and in the message that they express. Which is the expression of the 22 letters in every single language. There's no difference in Lashon HaKodesh and Lahabdil and other languages in the way the letters are expressed. It's just in their combination, as we just explained. And it's so easy to understand. That would be the Eisius associated with Dibur. And then the third, which is Eisius HaMachshava. What does it mean, Eisius HaMachshava? Since when do you hear me think in a particular manner where there is structured Eisius? No, that's the whole point of the person thinking. It's prior to the way he puts it into structured letters and combination of words, which is usually associated, namely associated with Dibur, with speech. But the answer is No, it's the case is not so. People think, let's put it this way, people think in a certain language as well. That's the emes. We think in languages, we think with structured messages, all associated with a very chav-based eisius, which eventually will come to expression, of course much more structured, in speech. But those same chav-based eisius, those 22 letters, also do exist in machshava. And it's very structured. And that's why people have the ability to take that which they think and put it even eloquently into words associated with these 22 letters. And the reason is because even in machshava, even in thought, they're also laid out. They're also structured, of course, subtly. You cannot compare the letters the way they are in machshava to the way they are in dibur. Of course not. There's no comparison. But nonetheless, it exists. As Dr. Rebbe goes on, machshava is also b'chol loshen, in every language, right? Loshen language, we think in language as well. A person thinks these words and these letters, which is also chav beis elavad, is only 22. The only thing is, when it comes to machshava, and here the Alter Rebbe continues, after making this quick presentation, on this overall presentation, that these ices, these letters exist, b'maisa, and b'dibur, and b'machshava, in action, and in speech. Again, the Rebbe speaks about action, again, the Tmunas Isis, and the Ksava Shurish, and the Sefer Torah. Speech is, again, something which is much more familiar, the identifying the ices with, and then even machshava, they're chav beis. Also, we think in a particular language, which is a combination of also the 22 letters, even in the world of machshava. Then the Alter Rebbe says, once we know that, we'll go on. That in machshava itself, it's subdivided into three. Raka, and the Alter Rebbe is going to show it to us. What does it mean, these isis in machshava? There's three levels of the isis in machshava. The answer is yes. And the Alter Rebbe goes on. There's three types of letters and three stages of the evolution. The way the isis come from the nefesh, which isis bechlal, not to go into it now, which is a famous chapter, which I believe we learned this. Yes, it's towards the beginning of the Geras HaKodesh. Alter Rebbe writes that the isis, all letters are really mushash and etzem on nefesh, much deeper than where the instrument, where they connect with the instruments, these 5 instruments mentioned. Because to quickly point out this, which is explained in that very chapter, this is Pedig Hey in the Geras HaKodesh, in this very segment. So Rebbe points out, you find it doesn't say exactly these words, but in other Maimorim of Chassidus, he says this in Mamish, in these words, and sometimes you find by a person which is a mute, he cannot talk. He's not lacking these 5 instruments. He has his teeth and tongue and lips and gum and throat. Everything is there, but they can't talk. But there's something unhealthy about them. Rachmana litzlan. Forsake us. You should be healthy, 100% healthy. But the what is lacking in this person is not the 5 instruments. Not that there's any blemish in these 5 instruments. If there's a blemish, Rachmana litzlan, in his nefesh, because the isis come from the nefesh. The 5 instruments, when the person is a healthy nefesh, he's able to talk. He has that structure. He has that health as a healthy human being, as a healthy nefesh. He has the ability to take that energy of the nefesh, which again is the source of these isis, and bring it into the 5 instruments, which ultimately formulate these letters. But it doesn't begin the other way around. The Rebbe does, in this case, gives us an example when your person wants to say pasach, something with a as opposed to a o, which would be known in the comments, or the o as opposed to a. It's not that they focus on these 5 instruments and start bending their lips in a certain way in order to pronounce that letter. No, this comes automatic. This comes consequent to the person. You want to say o, so your lips are moving in that direction, not the other way around, because isis are well anchored in the nefesh of the healthy human being. That is what really the human being is all about. The Yodam, the Nefesh Chaya. This is the gift, the Meiser Ha'adam Min HaBehema, the fact that they are able to talk. It's the gift of speech, which exclusively is given to the human being. By Yodam Nefesh Chaya, L'Ruach Memalalo. So that healthy human being, which has Isis and is never the source of the Isis in their Nefesh, are able, when they decide to say something, so everything kicks in, which is this 5 instruments, follows suit. and then the person is able to express a statement, communicate, say, if it's a communication, a one-on-one communication, or establish any presentation, any essay, or any way that we're able to express our dibur. But in machshava itself, so we say even machshava is already the stage after the way the isis come from the nefesh. It's important to note that the machshava, the isis, the way the machshava, there's so much structure in machshava that's not where the isis comment. It's not the initial state of where these letters come from. The letters come from the isis are mushish and the etzem nefesh, the healthy nefesh, which is the core of the nefesh of a human being. And then they evolve into thought, speech, and action. Now, could you compare these 22 letters, the way they're in thought, the way they're to express, and compare it to the way they're in speech? Of course not. In thought, it's much more subtle. It's hard to identify. You can think something within 5 minutes, and it take maybe 4 hours to present again via speech. It's definitely, these letters are expressed in mashaba subtly, much more subtle the way it is in dibur, understandably so, but nonetheless, they exist already, structured in a very structured manner in machshava, to the extent that we even think in language. We think in a particular language, and every language again is about the expression of 22 letters. The only difference is it's in its combination, as Dr. Rebbe points out over here. So, machshava itself, there are 3 levels. It's subdivided. What are the 3 levels of machshava? So he gives an example. He says, when you look at a siviteta and you look at the letters, they take image and they take form in your thought. What would that be called? Asiya sheba machshava. Mishnah Rebbe saying there's machshava, dibur, ma'isa in machshava itself. And he makes it very clear. You're looking at siviteta. So before we're talking about the siviteta, this is the ice. It's ma'isa. You could touch. You see that hay? You can put your hands on the hay. Actually, you'll feel the difference of the hay and the parchment, the way which the hay is written on, as an example. You can actually feel it. This is a ice maisa. But when you open the Sefer Torah, before you connect to the maisa of the ice of the letter, just looking at it, they take formation in your mind. That's the maisa of machshava. Easy to understand. Then, so too, and then what is the dibur of machshava? When you hear letters of speech, meaning to say, you hear someone talking. So you're not the one talking. You hear someone talking, so it's not your dibur, it's your machshava. It's your identifying what the other party is saying, which is taking formation in your mind, in your thought, right? Simple to understand. You're not the one talking, so it's not the classic Isis had dibur. It's you're listening to someone else talking. So what does that do? Though the speech of the other party takes image and formation in your mind, in your thought. You're starting to dissect it, decode it, or understand it, appreciate it. So you're thinking about it. That would be machshava, dibur sheba machshava. In Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, Shemeis, he said, dibur nishameis, they're imprinted. The machshavta in your mind. The mahar bahen, you think of the message of the other party, what the other party is expressing in those very words. So they're mitztayres, they take image in your thought. This is dibur sheba machshava. V'zeu nikra dibur sheba machshava. Here the Alter Rebbe says, corresponding to what world, to what Eilam this is. So this, before he didn't say that the previous level is Eilam HaBriya. Here he says this is a level of Yetzira. So I know we're not going to know the point of elaborating on this, because to understand the flow, but we do, in other words, we'll go on, not to take too much time to explain why the Yetzira, the Eilam HaYetzira over here, we know there's the 4 worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, but it does say Bria is, these 3, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, correspond to Machshava, Dibur, Ma'isa, thought, speech, and action. Bria would be Machshava, Dibur would be Yetzira, and Ma'isa would of course be Eilam HaMa'isa, world of Ma'isa. That's easy, the easiest to appreciate, because this is Ma'isa, this is action. This is the Eilam HaAsiya, and then Eilam HaAsiya Gashmi, this physical world which we live in. But the overall reason why this Dibur, Yetzira, Bria, and Machshava, because this is what Bria is all about. Bria is in a place which is, in other words, if you compare Bria to Elam Yitzira, as an example, Bria is a world which is definitely, there's no comparison to Elam Atzilus. We spoke about this many times, but Atzilus is not only the fourth one higher, Atzilus is a total different phenomenon. Total different phenomenon. That's why Atzilus corresponds to the Keiches of the Nefesh. Right? If you remember the beginning of Peri Gimel, Beis, and then as we cross from Beis to Gimel, in Lukuti Amarim, it's a click away. Beginning is that this is the Nefesh itself is divided into 10. That's the inner workings of the Nefesh. That's similar to the inner workings of the Kodesh Baruch Hu, which is again expressed in the Eilam Atzilus. It's a total different type of Eilam. It's not again just a higher world, and that is why it's compared to the Nefesh, the inner workings of the Nefesh itself. As we just say, you could see it in Peri Gimel in Tanya. And so Dr. goes through this Peri Gimel. These are very deep ideas. In other words, these are expressions, deep expressions of the Nefesh itself, which corresponds to Eilam Atzilus. Machshava Dibur Maisa, the way the person expresses his Nefesh through thought, speech, and action. This is already the lower world. Bria, Yitzira, Nasi. But Bria is a lofty world. Bria, in comparison to Yitzira, is also a lofty. It has a sense of exaltedness. This is the world of a Ganein Ha'elyin, which tzaddikim yeshuv and neni miziv ashchin on a higher level, in a much higher plane, which is compared to machshava. Machshava, things are much more subtle, much more removed from the structure of Eilam HaDibur. And this is the reason why one could think about an idea 5 minutes, you're taking 4 hours to present it, even without extra elaboration or extra, just because everything stands in a much higher, deeper, profound level of machshava in comparison to Dibur. Therefore, Bria, which is a much deeper world, this is the world of Ganein Ha'elyin, is compared to machshava. Dibur to Yitzira, because Dibur in comparison to Maisa, also Dibur is much more delicate. Right? Anybody can push a table. Speech is a much more refined type of expression of coming from the Nefesh. In other words, the Nefesh expresses of Dibur is much a richer investment. Dibur is a rich faculty, a rich way of expressing the Nefesh, much more than Maisa. Even a non-human being has Maisa. For that matter, maybe even more. An animal could pull more than a human being, as an example. But the advantage and the uniqueness of the human being is, of course, their speech. Speech is greater and deeper, and a deeper expression of the Nefesh. Therefore, speech would be Eilam HaYitzira. And then you have Eilam HaSiyah, which is Maisa, corresponds to Maisa. Again, that's easy to understand. So, when he speaks about Oisius, Dibur Shebe Machshava, he says this is Eilam HaYitzira. Machshava in its original in other words, the original idea of the machshava, like we just said, machshava, shibim machshava, would be associated with Eilam HaBriya, as we just explained. Now, the chidush over here is that this is still within machshava itself. It's not the generic dibur. It's dibur shibim machshava, but nonetheless, from that perspective and point of view of the dibur-ness, if you will, that corresponds to Eilam HaYitzira. Then he says, "Va'isiyas hamachshava." In other words, he starts from Maisa sheba machshava. That would be corresponding to Eilam HaSiyah, that dimension of Asiyah within machshava itself. Even though the overall machshava, the entire machshava is associated with Eilam HaBriya, nonetheless, the idea of Asiyah, Maisa, machshava would be Eilam HaSiyah. Dibur of Asiyah, that dimension of Dibur, which with the Reis machshava would be corresponding to Eilam HaYitzira. And then he goes on deeper, Oisius machshava levada. Beli here Oisius HaDibur, without the thinking and the decoding letters of speech. Just when you capture the idea itself, your mind is thinking of an idea, but you're not coming directly from the appreciating the message of the other party who just said a statement, right? Let's just think about someone can communicate. He communicates a certain idea to you. So there's different stages of you absorbing that message. There's the original absorption, the original hands-on, those words where the other party told you, as an example, trying to convey to you. And then once you decode those words and you try to understand and appreciate in your mind, and in this case in your thought captures the idea, then what happens is the next stage is the actual words of the other party kind of falls away, the choice of words. It's not that you ignore the choice of words. Sometimes in the choice of words, choice of expression is what is underscored, and that's what you take to heart and to mind. We're not ignoring that, but at the end of the day, the combination of these words, that's what falls away. And the concept really is what you internalize, what you think about, what you identify with. So those Isis and Machshava, without the Dibur dimension, even of the other party, that would be pure Machshava, Sheb Machshava. Is what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here, and it's so easy to understand and appreciate. Basis on Machshava Levad B'lir here, Isis, where that's called Machshava Shmachshava. Pchinas Bria, corresponding to the Ilma Bria, as we just explained. The Rebbe goes on again. We still don't see the relevance, right, to the message of your test. But let's go on. These letters of speech. When you do appreciate a certain thought, and then you bring it to expression in words, those words, those are 22 letters, they receive their energy from the machshava, from your own machshava. You thought about a certain idea and then you put it into words, meaning that you put it into speech. What you did was you took the energy of machshava. In other words, speech doesn't come about if you don't think what you're going to say. You don't plan, you don't orchestrate exactly what you're going to say. They usually say, could someone just throw a few words without deeply thinking into an idea? The answer is yes, but those words is because there's something you already had in your mind many times, and therefore you didn't have to establish that organized, structured evolution from Isis to Dibur, and therefore you were able to speak even without planning this in your mind or organizing, instead of orchestrating before, no, organizing this in your mind. Before organizing this in your mind, you're able to say a few, because that was already in your mind many, many times. But a normal presentation, for example, an essay or any other structured, organized presentation, there is an organized evolution from machshava to dibur. You have it presented in your mind with a seder mesud in a very organized way in your machshava, with these very 22 letters again, and in a particular language even. And from there, you carry it over from thought into speech. That is the normal evolution of the transition of thought into speech. As Alter Rebbe goes on to say, when a person has a presentation which comes to speech, they were formulated in your machshava, again, on a total different level. Of course, the subtlety of machshava you can compare it to deeper. We just gave, again, the very same example. You could have these very icy, very letters set up in your mind. It could take you 5 minutes in your mind, or maybe even less, and it could take you 4 hours, as an example, maybe even more, to put it into speech. Remember the famous part of Arizal? Arizal said if he was, it was 2 hours, he said if I had to put into speech what I just captured in my mind in those 2 hours, it would take 80 years, verbatim the Arizal, it would take 80 years to have the exact presentation of it. And we know that Arizal didn't live long, as we know. And we're not talking about the full life of the Arizal, of course, but he just tried to point out. So now, not everything one thinks in 2 hours, it takes 80 years to present. We're talking the mind of the Arizal, which was extremely deep. But you get the idea. The idea is that anything in machshava, together with the fact that there are structured 22 letters, and one would say, okay, the 20 letters machshava and dibur, the difference should be, proportionate. 5 minutes should be 50 minutes. No, but we know that together with the fact that there are structured 22 letters, and a person even thinks in a language, it is in a total different plane, a total different level. The way it is in speech, which is much more structured, and therefore takes so much more time, disproportionate than the way it is in machshava. But nonetheless, the classic way of a person establishing a presentation again by his speech comes from an organized transition from machshava to dibur. As we just said, sometimes we could say something and we could be thinking about a total different idea. So where is the organized evolution or transition? Answer. You can say that phrase or that statement if you did not repeat it without thinking about it. Again, with this organized transition, the organized evolution from machshava to dibur if you didn't repeat that many, many, many times in speech. So you didn't have to think about it profoundly before you uttered those words. Or together with that, in the past, it was in your thought many, many times. It's something which you're very used to. For example, davening. It's a problem that we daven and we don't think the words the way we were saying, because so sometimes these unique prayers, what are the reasons why people have sometimes kavanah, much more intent, sometimes by far, with prayers which are one is not accustomed to say, and people, you see their heart and mind, and it's real. It's emotional. And where were you by davening that very morning? Davening, you said all these precious words, and it was sometimes the difference is very stark. And the simple answer is because these are prayers which we don't repeat frequently. That's the simple answer. Therefore, we pay much more attention. We set up our machshava to appreciate what those words mean. And if the words bring out a certain emotion in the relationship with the Hashem and His people, and us with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so on, our beseech and Hashem's ability to help us, or whatever the content is all about, we pay much more attention. So when we say it, we're really involved because we think about it in a total level as a comparison to something that we say every single day. Now that's the importance of paying attention and making the effort in davening properly, davening like a mensch, that we say, yeah, I say this every single day, but nonetheless, there's a reason why I say it every single day. The reason why there's the constitution, the why tefillah, the constitution of prayers, in this very manner and fashion that we say it very frequently, once a day, or certain prayers 3 times a day as an example. And if there's a reason, the Anshe Knesset Gedula wanted us to have that machshava and tefillah, the way they have the proper davening. The hirur and tefillah mean to say that to make the effort, that despite I said this so many times, and I say it every day, and certain prayers 3 times a day, nonetheless, it is incumbent upon me to organize the content of this prayer in my mind and my machshava, and to appreciate the words. And when I utter the words, I should really be there, and my mind should be there, my emotions should be there. That's the whole point of, that's why tefillah is called avodas hatefillah. That the Yid said, despite I say this every day, and so many times, nonetheless, I make the effort. And again, there is a clear reason why it's established that we say this every day. For the spirit, as we say, as we know that it's not just asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for so that frequent. It's about, a lot of it is about us, our alignment with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can never compare a Yid with davens. And again, I don't mean davening as lip service, nor the formalities of davening, but in davens, the pnimiyusa, he's there in the experience of davening to a Yid, which doesn't daven. It's a different phenomenon, it's a different dynamic, it's a different type of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a relationship of authenticity, of integrity, of honesty and sincerity. It's a different type of Yid. Davening, at the end of the day, is most of it for us, to align ourselves with our emes, our neshama. That's the whole point of prayer. But it's called avodas hatefillah. Why is avodas hatefillah? Because iyun, looking for that word in the Gemara, iyun tefillah, it's an avodah. And the reason why it's an avodah, because we say it every single day. And again, that's the reason why these prayers, which we periodically say, people get together and say, Yehi Ratzon, it's because we don't say it that often. So it's easier to organize our mind, to identify with the words, to be there in those very words which we utter. The regular davening, we say. And he goes back, and again, I'm just using this just as an example. The reason why someone could say something without, he could be thinking about something else, and saying a full sentence, which makes sense, not that he threw out a few words which you cannot make sense of these words. No, these words have meaning, and the words convey a certain message to another party, or in context of education, and anyway. And the reason why your mind's in a different place, and you can still say a full statement which carries a full message, even though your mind is not on the content of this which you're expressing with dibur and speech. The answer simply is because you said this many times, and you thought about this many times. So your mind could be in one place, and you could still say, express a full statement which makes sense and carries a message, despite your mind did not come directly from machshava to dibur in this very case, in this very expression. That's what it was dibra. You spoke about it, you said this many times, and you thought about this many times. So how do they come? How do they in the end of the day come out in this? This statement has a full message, and if it's applied by especially another party or something, it goes places. And if it's a positive message, it of course brings so much positivism. And in the end of the day, your mind wasn't there at all. You just threw out a few words. You were thinking about something totally different, and nonetheless, this came out. How does that happen? As we just said, the way it is in reality is because you thought about it so many times and you said it so many times. It wasn't a big deal for you to say it. But how does it really work? So Alter Rebbe shows us how it really works. What happens is that in this combination of that phrase and that message that you expressed, you have the rishimo, an imprint rather, of the thought that entered into that speech many times. When you say that you spoke about something many times, you said that rather statement many times, you thought about that many times. And therefore, at this time that you expressed that very message, your mind, your thought could have been in another place. So how did those words come? If the whole dibur is a clear evolution, is a transition from Elam Machshava to Elam Dibur, the answer that there's an imprint of this that you thought so many times that allowed that phrase, that statement to come out in a very structured manner in the world of speech. So not that you're presently thinking about it, but it's a rishimo. Now, rishimo, you say literally rishimo. For example, you write something, you write baruch on a piece of paper, or any other letter on a piece of paper, and then you take your eraser and you erase it. So, paper's blank, but it's not completely blank. Because the reason why it's not completely blank, because there's still a rishimo, it's hard to get rid of completely the lead, let's say from that pencil, off the paper. And if you write something again and again and again and you erase it, the more you'll write on that piece of paper, and even followed by the eraser, the imprint will stay. But you erased it and it's gone, and you're taking the pencil and writing in another paper, again, to compare it to what he's saying over here. Your mind is in a different place, but there's still an imprint. As much as you erased, meaning to say that the lead is right now, that message of that lead, which is coming from the pencil on the paper, is gone, and you erased it. Look carefully, you will see that something remains. And if you look even more carefully, you'll see the entire line, which is an entire statement, an entire message, even though you formerly erased it. You're writing it on a different paper. And again, to this message, you're thinking about something else. But because you thought about it so much, and you put into speech so much, again, similar to this example, a mark will remain, kind of if you like it or not. So your mind is somewhere else. But the fact that you thought about it so many times, there's a rishimo, there's a mark from that machshava which entered into these combination of words. But especially, not only you thought about it so much, but you said it so many times. So you can be thinking about something else, but this structured message could ultimately take formation and be expressed in a very structured, organized speech. So not that you're thinking about it, but a rishima remains. Okay, beautiful illustration. The way it is in the human condition, by the human being. What's the connection to the previous message of Yutes? So we pointed this out in the beginning. So again, what is to sum it up, there's machshava, dibur, ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action. Isis, now letters in the world of machshava, letters in the world of speech, letters in the world of action. And Alter Rebbe explains how it is in ma'aseh, and in dibur, and machshava. And then he subdivides. He says, in machshava there is machshava, dibur, ma'aseh, machshava itself. And he points out that every structured dibur comes from a structured, organized machshava. But then he concludes something which we're very familiar with. It's something that you think about a lot. and you express many times that same idea as an example, you could say it, and again, in a very, without any errors, and comes out a full statement, and again, many times the statement makes an impact on the listener, and positive impact as an example, but your mind was in a total different place. How does that happen? Answer, something that you thought about enough, and you put it into words many, many times, and you thought about it again many, many times. So the imprint, the rishima, the mark of this which you thought, goes into those words, even though you're thinking about something else, you're still presenting that very statement. Is what the Alter Rebbe is saying up till here. But now the Alter Rebbe concludes with the last two lines over here. This is what we spoke in the beginning. This is the message of this Igeres HaKedesh, namely the latter part of the Igeres HaKedesh, the way it's associated with Torah. Neivlis Chochmah Shalamaylas Torah. He said that's the Achirai Mechitzenius Nihi Meparts of Ha'elyon Shenichnas Betachtem Liis Lebchinas Meichem Mechais Keneda. You got it? Right? No, right? These are interesting words of it, but it's the spirit of the message lies within these words. So, if you remember, the Alter Rebbe says that Moshe Rabbeinu had a re'iyah in Achirai, which is Netzach HaYisod Malchus. Here he skips out Malchus because he's talking about the 6 midas, and we explained that the Nihi Netzach HaYisod is the chitzenius of the midah. I'm not going to go into it. You can see it in the previous classes on Yud in this very chapter. We learned about this. Again, you can see it by following. Again, you could find the message via the when you open the class, you see the text where it speaks about Netzach HaYisod Malchus being the chitzenius of the midas. And again, we took the time to explain. So Nihi is the chitzenius of the parts of Ha'elyon, literally translated, the supreme image of the Pnimius, which is Nichnes Betachtin, enters into the lower, to be Meichem B'chayis, to be its intellect, meaning literally Meichem would be intellect, and to be its energy. Now, why is Meichem B'chayis? Meichem is where the Machshava enters, just like actual speech comes from thought. Thought is usually special, particularly organized. Healthy thought is a combination of your understanding of a matter. It combines with machshava. We spoke about this in the past, namely in Dalid, in Peirik Dalid, L'Kutei Amarim, the first segment. It's also a quick way. The very first segment. Remember, this is the fourth. The first segment, Dalid. We spoke about machshava. That was the whole point of machshava. Machshava is a lavush. It's a garment that it goes together with a chochmah ben adas, and then it becomes the energy of the presentation of speech, as we just explained. So this is why he uses the lashon meichin, even though he's referring to the machshava, but the machshava is a lavush, a garment to meichin. This becomes the chayis, this becomes the energy of that dibur, but there's no pnimis hamachshava over here. You're not thinking about the idea. It's not an organized thought right now, which is being focused on, which is establishing this transition from machshava to dibur. That would be the pnimius of the chokhmah, the pnimius of the machshava, rather, even though it's in the end the machshava being the levush to the chokhmah. It's the pnimius of the machshava, which eventually carries over to dibur. But here, you're speaking something that you're not even thinking about. So it's the chitzonius, it's something, and the only reason why you're able to formulate that perfect sentence is because you thought about it, but you're not thinking about it. So it's an imprint, it's a mark of a past which is establishing itself and coming down into this dibur. So it's the chitzonius, it's the about face of a supreme image, which in this case would be a machshava, that expresses itself b'chitzonius, because b'pnimius you're not there at this time, you're not thinking about this at this time, and is coming into the tachton to be that energy, meaning to say, if there wasn't the energy of machshava, you would not be able to formulate any speech. You would not be able to say that statement. So it is the energy of the machshava, but you're not thinking about it now. So how did you formulate such a structured expression? Is because there is something, the external, meaning to something you thought about it so many times. So there is the imprint. Of course, when you talk about an imprint, a mark is the chitzonius of the word itself. Let's say this, which you write in a paper, you write baruch. There's an pnimis, the energy which is in that word. When you, or any other letter, and when you erase it, we don't want to say erase bracha, right? When you erase that letter, So the Pneumius is gone. There's the Chitzenis, which the residue, if you will. It's what's left over. That's the Chitzenis, which is in your Machshava, because you thought about it many times. Right now you're not focusing, you're not paying attention, you're not even thinking about it at this time. But because you thought about it so many times, so there's a mark. That's the Chitzenis. And that becomes the energy. It has to be a vital energy, because that formulates an entire sentence. So you see over here a concept of the Chitzenis, of the Elyon, be establishing a whole presentation in the Tachtin. And it becomes such chayas that a whole sentence is able to come out. Even though right now my penis is not there, I'm not thinking about it. Do we get the connection to the previous, to the message of it? So that's what Teda is. Teda is Pnimiyus Shel Kodesh Baruch Hu. Teda is Chachmas Shel Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's what Teda is all about. It's one with its emanator. It's the Pnimiyus of it. But the Chachma turns about face, the Chibara Isas Acheri, a Ri'iyah of the Acherai. Associated with Netzach, you say it again, it's all connected to the first part also of your test. But the whole point of Teda is Nevelis Chachmashal, Nevelis Chachmashal, which expresses itself b'chitzeni Yusay. But in the end, just like in speech, it carries a whole message. So too, in the end of the day, you take a Gemara, which is Nevelis Chachmashal Amayla, and you sit and learn Gemara. In the end of the day, you're connected to the Pnim. It's just like there's a whole full structured sentence in Dibur. Even it's the chitzenis of the alien, but it established itself chayas, a real energy which allows that Dibur to come out, a very structured Dibur. You take that Gemara in the end of the day, it's Nevis Chachma Shalamayla, but with this Gemara, the Gemara you're learning, or Mishnah you're learning, or Halacha you're learning, or any part of Torah you're learning, in the end of the day, you're connected to the source of that very chayas, which is, in this case, would be Machshava, in the case Lahavdil of Torah, and who v'chachmasi echad, you connect yourself in the end of the day to the Eibishter himself, to the Anechi Hashem Alikecha, which is the whole idea of Torah. As we explained, Dr. Eben explains this again, a click away, you can see it. We mentioned the 3 chapters. These are fundamental chapters from the Kuti Amorim, the first segment, Hey Chav Zayin and Lamed, Hey Chav Gimel and Lamed Zayin. The person connects himself. Indicates the union which comes through Teda is unprecedented. There's no comparison, rather. There's no comparison to that union which a Yid connects and unites with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through this very Teda, which is Nevelis Chachma Shalom Mayla, which made its way down into Seder Ishtalshus all the way to El Maasiyah. Have a wonderful